Okay, welcome everybody. This is the final chapter of Genesis. Glad you're here today. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All morning I've been working on Easter, and which has its own PowerPoint. And so I almost pulled up, had the Easter PowerPoint up, and I was like, no, you can't see that yet. Can't see that yet. Okay, here's where we've been. We are finishing up Genesis, right? So we're going to finish up with the story of Joseph. And it's been an incredible book, right? So first half, God creates the world. Second half, we have these intense stories that are sometimes beautiful and sometimes awful about the patriarchs, the story of Israel, the people who will go on to be in Exodus and return out of the desert to Israel. All of this foundation, and I want to talk about this more today, are the stories that were the sacred scripture that Jesus taught from. So I want to come back to that. This was Jesus's Bible, okay? Okay, let's start with Genesis 42. Remember what's happened so far, okay? Let's go back to Joseph's story. He had this little, Technicolor coat. I showed you the pictures of the beautiful Donny Osmond, right? So Joseph irritates his brother by interpreting these dreams that say he's going to be high and mighty, and he shares them with his brothers who have had it with him. They're going to kill him, but the oldest brother convinces them not to. And instead, they capture him in a pit and sell him off to slavers. They tell the dad that he was killed by a wild animal. And then they go home and live life without Joseph. Joseph has ups and downs when he's taken to Egypt. He becomes a high servant, slave in Pharaoh's like head of the guard household, and then is sexually harassed and accused of rape, sent to jail, languishes there for a long time until finally nobody can interpret Pharaoh's dream and Joseph comes in. Joseph correctly interprets the dream and ends up rising to second in command because Egypt is about to face a massive famine. Not just Egypt, the whole world will face a massive famine. And Joseph knows that they will have to have reserves to feed not only Egypt, but for all of the refugees who will come. So he steps in to create the plan for them. That's where we were. Okay, let's go back then to Joseph's family who are going to become those refugees. Someone want to read this one? Go ahead, Tony.
When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was a famine in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them.
So a couple of things to call out in this one is Jacob, Israel does not, hi Bernie, does not Benjamin. I think that's okay to Bernie. This is, I think, the first time we're going to hear about Benjamin. Benjamin is the child born to Rachel and Jacob. So the favored love, the great love of Jacob, Rachel, the one he worked 14 years for. She couldn't have children. He prayed to God. She gave birth to Joseph. And then years later, she has a second son, and that is Benjamin. And Benjamin is the one that she dies in childbirth too. So if you remember back to the stories of Rachel's death, remember Rachel doesn't make it back to the tomb of the patriarch. She's not buried there. There's another tomb where she's buried, and that's the one that's now, it's in Palestine, and it's where women who are wanting a safe pregnancy will go on pilgrimage to. Very sacred space. Also in occupied territory. So this is her child. This is the one she delivered as she was dying, is Benjamin. So he's young. He is Joseph's full brother. So the rest of them are all half brothers. Okay, so Egypt has everything the world needs to survive. If people want to make it through the famine, they got to go to Egypt to buy grain. They're the only ones who has it. And so Jacob is going to send the kids there. He's going to keep Benjamin back. Just like Joseph was his favorite, the child of his great love, Benjamin is now his favorite. He does not want Benjamin to go, so he keeps him back. So they make their way to Egypt to buy the food. And lo and behold, Joseph is now in charge. He has all the power. The brothers do not recognize him, but Joseph does, right? So he knows who they are. The brothers do not. So what Joseph's going to try to do is figure out whether or not the brothers have basically changed since they sold him into slavery. Joseph is going to keep one brother. He's going to let him buy the food. And then he's going to keep one brother and he's going to send the rest back, asking them that the youngest brother come back to Egypt. So Joseph knows Benjamin's not there. He wants to see him. And then he basically kind of sets them up, but gifts them the grain. So he sends the 9 brothers back, keeps one, and the money that the brothers brought to purchase the grain, he puts that into their saddlebags, right? So it's a gift. The brothers are very confused. They have no idea why Pharaoh's official would do this. Okay, so the famine is going to continue. Remember that one brother's still in Egypt. So, oh, Tony, did you have a question or do you want to read?
What? No. Why didn't his brothers recognize him?
Oh, it could have been anything. Like, who would have guessed the brother that they thought they had killed and sold into slavery would now be like the most important person in the world, right? This is the person that has all the power over who's going to live and die. And right now, all they're focused on is getting food for their families. Joseph's been gone for ages. And I think it's fair to assume there's no way they would have thought that that would have been Joseph.
Okay. Thank you.
Joseph has aged quite a bit, right? So he was like late adolescent when they sold him off. Okay, Chris, did you want to read this one?
Yeah. Okay,
go ahead.
yes. Now the famine was still severe in the land. So when they had eaten all the grain they had bought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go back and buy us a little more food." But Judah said to him, "The man warned us solemnly, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go down, because the man said to us, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.' Israel asked, 'Why did you bring this trouble on me by telling me the man you had another brother?'"
Okay, keep going, Sue, or Chris.
As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. After he had washed his face, he came out and, controlling himself, said, "Serve the food."
Okay, so no more food. They have to go back. And they tell Israel, Jacob, that the only way they're going to get food is if they bring Benjamin. And, Jacob's kind of pissed. He's like, well, why'd you even let him know that he existed, right? No clue that this could be his son. So it was very, Joseph was real clear. There's no more food unless Benjamin comes. So they take Benjamin into Egypt. And Joseph welcomes them and prepares a feast for them, and is completely overcome when he sees Benjamin, and he has to run out of the room sobbing. Now, Joseph does not eat with the brothers, but he puts them in order of descending age to sit them down. So he's not going to sit with them, right? So one would think, if this, Jewish official, to Tony's credit, how come they didn't know it was Joseph? Again, he's giving them a huge clue here. He's putting them in descending age chronological order. Like, clearly he knew something about them, right? But Joseph does not eat with them. He goes and he eats with the Egyptians. And the reason he does that is because it is detestable to eat with the Hebrews. So Joseph is fully assimilated. He is going to go with his people. His people are the Egyptians. And interestingly enough, when the feast comes, Benjamin is going to get 5 times the servings. Okay, so then we come into this story of a silver cup, and it's a kind of an odd one, right? So, time to take the food back. So Joseph tells the servants to fill up the bags with food and with gold, and he puts a silver cup in there. Then, after they've headed out, he sends his men after them and accuses them of stealing the cup, right? And he put it in Benjamin's bag. So when the bags are searched, they, of course, find the cup. And they bring the brothers all back to Egypt. And Joseph offers to set the brothers free if the guilty party, which is Benjamin, the cup was in his bag, stays as his slave. So Joseph orchestrates this entire thing to see if the brothers will leave Benjamin to save their own skins. And it's Judah. Judah, again, is the one that saved Joseph, right? The other brothers wanted to kill Joseph. He's the one that was like, no. That's why Joseph wasn't killed. Judah pleads to take Benjamin's place. And that's when Joseph realizes that his brothers have, in fact, changed. Okay, someone want to read this one?
I will.
Go ahead, Diane.
Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to the brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, his brothers talked with him.
So Joseph reveals himself, the great reveal. Now, Joseph had enormous power in this situation. He could have exacted his revenge, right? He could have turned them all into slaves. He could have starved them. Instead, Joseph is going to see the hand of God in all of this. And he doesn't blame his brothers for what they did. Instead, he is going to view this situation as God sent him ahead to preserve their lives. Okay, so when Pharaoh finds out that Joseph's brothers are there, he's going to give them the best land in Goshen, in Egypt. So the brothers are going to go home with this amazing news. One, that their brother has returned, and two, that they have a new home, and they will be prosperous in that new home. They are saved. So now Jacob finds out. Will someone read this one?
I will.
Thanks, Shirley.
Now Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive."
So Jacob has his reunion with his long lost son. So that pretty much takes us to the end of the Joseph story. And then we get into a lot of bizarre loose ends. But I'm going to stop here for just a second. Because I think the critical point for me of the Joseph stories is going back to the recognition that these stories were Jesus's Bible. These were the Torah, the sacred scripture that Jesus taught from, right? And so much of this past month, and I'm going to preach it again on Sunday, has been this teaching from the Sermon on the Mount about forgiveness. And I think as Christians, we often put that teaching solely on Jesus as a unique and original teaching. And I think what the beauty of doing things like studying Genesis and studying Joseph's story is it challenges us to look at what the references Jesus was drawing on. One of the key stories Jesus is drawing on is this incredible story of forgiveness that Joseph experiences in Genesis. So when people, I have a lot to say about how Christians have co-opted the Hebrew scriptures in the Old Testaments. And a lot of times we read back into them and we say, oh, this is, the foretelling of Jesus in these scriptures. And I don't believe in that. I do believe it's really critical to know these stories and then to look at the connection between the messages that Jesus taught. And the forgiveness one is a big one. It's a big one. And the Joseph story is kind of foundational in that respect. Questions on any of that? We'll finish up the chapter then.
How far was it from where Jacob lived to Egypt? Because they were going back and forth all the time. How far was that trip?
I want to say it was several days. So let me see if I can pull up a map real quick to show you. Because it's the same map, it's the same trip that's going to take them 40 years when they come out. Let's see what I can find. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to copy this and plop it in here. Okay, got it. So it's not the best picture. But so Joseph's up in here. where, so this is the Dead Sea on the right. Do you see this? And then they're gonna come down this green route, Gaza, across the Mediterranean, around the coast, and into Egypt. So that's the distance we're talking about. When they come out of Egypt in Exodus, it's that red line. That's where they're going to wander all around in there in the Sinai desert. That's the 40 years in there.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Marie.
So you would say the forgiveness part maybe is what, it seemed to me they spent a lot of time on the details of the Joseph story. So it must be an important story.
Yeah, it's a very important story. And I have to say, if I were gonna do a PhD, one of the topics I'm really intrigued at are the foundational stories in the Hebrew scripture that basically are the building blocks of Jesus's ministry. Because I think they're there. I think hospitality is there. I think the ever-present God is there. I think forgiveness is there. And so he was pulling from that sacred scripture to create his ministry. I think I would never do this. I would never ever go back to grad school. But if I did, I think that would be an interesting topic.
Yeah,
I have about 5 of them. Go ahead, Bernie.
Well, first of all, I want to say I'm awfully glad to hear you say what you just said, because to be honest with you, I thought it was like reading a soap opera story. But when you put it in context with the fact that this is how Jesus was taught, and therefore in turn how he taught, then okay, it seems to make some sense. Other than that, I was really having trouble getting anything out of it.
Yeah, yeah. So when you think about the fact that the Torah is these first 5 books of the Bible, right? So this is a foundational one. This is the one that is read every Sabbath in synagogues, right?
Which leads me to another question, which you may have already answered. When was this 5-book Bible put together? When was it decided that this is what was going to be in it?
Yeah.
Do we know that?
Yep, we do. We know that it happened while they were in exile in Babylon. That's when they started to write the stories down. It was oral tradition and what do you call it? Disparate pieces that were written down. It was when they were in Babylon. So the Babylonians come in, they destroy the temple, they take away all of basically the smart people, the scribes, the scholars, all the elite, all the wealthy, and those are the hostages that they take to Babylon. They're in Babylon for decades, like 2 generations are going to pass. And so it's then when they recognize that they have to write down their sacred stories and collect them. And that's when they all come together. And
So
that's why this theme of, the ever-present God who is not going to leave them, the promises with God, even in hard times. That's why these stories were so important, that they captured them then and there.
Are we talking 1,000 years BC? 400 years BC?
That was about 570 BC. So about
570,
BC,
okay.
they wrote it down.
Half a millennium, all right.
Yep, about 550 BC. Okay, let's go ahead and finish this up. Okay, so the last 2 chapters are just odd. I don't know if there's any other way to say it. But here's the good news. You all know by this point in time, Genesis was not written by one individual. It is a library of stories that are threaded together. And so it ends a little disjointed. It's not a pretty package. Genesis is going to end with basically the jumping off place for Exodus. So the end of Genesis took us from creation at the macro level to creation of the nation of Israel and all of the tribes that will come out of it. And there's a ton of loose ends. So, Genesis 46, I'll just go through this. Again, Israel is again an immigrant. So they're in Egypt. The entire theme of Genesis is this book of migrants and refugees, which makes sense given when it's written down, right? It's written by a group of refugees. Now, this is really critical. In Genesis and into Exodus, God goes with them to Egypt. This was really just mind-blowing for the ancient world because gods, up until this point in time, were geographic dependent. So this now says God's going to follow these people wherever they go, which again, if you think about, the lens of the people who were writing this down, this is incredibly important information. In that Babylonian exile, God is everywhere, right? It doesn't matter where you go, God is with them. For centuries moving forward, the Jewish people are going to be cast out of land after land. God is going to go with them. God is no longer geographically central, right? Okay. So Israel is going to take his herds and all of his families into Egypt. He's going to be united, and they're going to become quite prosperous. Let's do Genesis 47. Will someone read this one? Stella. Go ahead, Chris.
What did I do? I made it too big. Oh, there we go. I hit it and it went king size. Okay, now the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and were fruitful and increased greatly in number. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years, and the years of his life were 147. When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called for his son Joseph and said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh and promise that you will show me kindness and faithfulness. Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried." "I will do as you say," he said. "Swear to me," he said. Then Joseph swore to him, and Israel worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. As he leaned on the top of his staff.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so this is the first usage of the word Israelites, that the Israelites settled in Egypt. First time it's used in the Bible. So the nation of Israel is forming, even though they are not in the nation of what will become Israel, the Israelites. So Israel lives for another 17 years in Egypt. And this is the point where we're seeing that shift from a story about a family to a story about a nation. Israel is going to request that his bones are going to be buried in the family pot in Canaan. And Joseph is going to agree to that. So, okay, I want to stop there, and I'm going to send you into small groups for a little bit. You have now heard the stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. My question for you is, which part of those stories call to you the most? Okay. We need to do breakout rooms. And I'm going to send you out for a little bit. Feel free to process anything about Genesis that you think is important. And I'm going to give you about 10 minutes, okay? There you go.
Oh, here's my group. We are just the first here. Rule followers.
The other group, I'm sure, is just rabble rousers. I try to divide up the Catholics.
Good job.
Now we know.
Yeah. That's our criteria. Who went to catechism in Catholic school?
Chris and I and Diane.
I'm ever reading, the Old Testament, reading Genesis, first time.
Yeah. Okay, any thoughts, observations?
Yeah, we think that you should go ahead and if you don't have time to go do your doctorate, maybe you could do a series of, or maybe a good place to start would be do a series of sermons on the origin of some of Jesus's
Oh,
thoughts. We like that idea.
yeah, yeah.
So there's your assignment for your sabbatical.
Just a simple one.
I do believe the hooks are there.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I mean, when you look at all of Genesis with that viewpoint of what did Jesus see here,
Yeah,
it's an interesting view.
yeah.
We
And the fact
also-
that he was like marinated in those stories. I mean, those
Yeah.
are the stories, right? Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
We also talked about the forgiveness issue. How Joseph, he was tossed into prison when he got there. When he read the Pharaoh's dreams, then he was basically forgiven. But he didn't hold a grudge against anybody.
No.
It seemed wisely and ran the Pharaoh's whatever. What was he, the guardian of, or the guards, the head of the guards?
Yep.
Anyway, the household. And when his brothers showed up, he didn't seem to have a grudge against them, and they were all shocked.
Yeah.
What we also said about that was that it seems like the culture of the Middle East is very much about keeping grudges for centuries and centuries and centuries, and so that you can see where Jesus would have picked up on that story of Joseph as a way to preach an alternative to what seemed to be the going theory
Yeah,
in the Middle East.
yeah.
Interesting that the people
question.
in the Middle East didn't. Go
No,
ahead.
go ahead. No, you.
Well, it's just interesting that they rebuked Christianity so terrifically. You'd think they would have held on to one good thing, which would have been forgiveness.
I think, interesting. I think that I could have a Muslim scholar here who would probably say forgiveness is a pretty foundational tenet of the Quran. And so I would be cautious about assuming that it's not there, because, and I am by no means no Quran scholar, but I do know that there are some very, very strong tenets of forgiveness. And remember, so many of the stories of Genesis are foundational to the Quran as well.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is to remember that we tend to hear the viewpoints of the extremes of the extreme Islamists, and think of what the extreme Christians present to the world.
Yeah. Good point.
Correct.
Yeah.
Remind me, Marci, the planting of the cup in Benjamin's, that was to get Benjamin back and send the brothers on. Was that the purpose of it? Is that why they planted that in his pack?
He planted the cup to see whether or not the brothers would leave Benjamin behind to save their own hides.
Oh, okay. All
And
right.
they didn't. So they argued instead to places with them. So, yeah. So, okay, let me show you. I got one more slide for y'all. Still is not happy she's in the crate. Okay, here's the stuff that's up and coming. I want to make sure you're aware of. Next Tuesday, I am going to teach a class on something called the pre and post Easter Jesus. So this came up from a conversation I had with Diane. Hey, stand down. Do you see that bad little dog over there? And this is how I really understand Jesus and I preach Jesus is who was Jesus before Easter and then who did Jesus become after Easter? And they're very different. They're very different. And I think it's really important as we dive into these gospels to keep that in mind. We're reading post-Easter Jesus stories, and it's hard to tease out sometimes the pre-Easter. So I'm going to teach a class on what's pre-Easter and what's post-Easter. It's a one-time class. I thought Holy Week would be a great time to do it. That's next Tuesday at 1. Then our next adult ed class is going to be with Reverend Carson. It's going to be on Zoom. And Carson's going to do a book study on the book Conversations with God. And we have several of those. Big fan of Carson. I would take a class from Carson if they wanted to read the phone book. So this will be good. So, and it's a great book. So we have some of those. I'd encourage you to think about that. You have a couple weeks in April to get a book and start diving in. And then here's some of the stuff that has come up about the fall topics. A piece on Magdalene, and I've been thinking a lot about that one. Kind of the historical piece, the theological piece. I'd like to do a little bit about her and her Gnostic Bible, her Gnostic Gospel, and have some readings from her Gnostic Gospel. The topic of Exodus, so just kind of keep going with this story and find out what actually happens. And Exodus is a pretty fun, crazy book. So I do see the draw to that. Next up for the Gospels would be Matthew. And then I'm still looking to see, ad hoc classes, if there's a historical or theological topic that appeals to you. So I've taught classes on heaven and hell and angels and teaching this one on pre and post Easter. We did a lot with Revelations on apocalyptical understanding. So if there's a theological topic, I like slipping in one of those topics every so often as well. So those are the sort of things I'm looking for as I come up with the plan for next year. So thoughts, inputs, wisdom, other ideas you want to toss on the table that I don't have.
So do you want to talk about it right now?
If you have ideas, you feel free to give them to me, or you can send me an email.
Well, I like the ideas of doing Exodus and Matthew's.
Okay.
I just had one pop into my head, and I there's so many, I don't know if you could do it, but just about dreams in the Bible,
Oh,
how dreams play an
Okay.
important part in the Bible.
that would be fun. Anyone else? Go ahead. Bernie, are you saying you have an
No,
idea?
I'm sorry, scratching my head.
Okay, well, if something comes up, please email me and let me know. I'll try to lock this down in the next month or so, okay?
Okay.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for coming. I really enjoyed doing this one with you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you. This
Marci.
has
Take
been
care.
great.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.